So for Rockets fans, there's been quite a bit of action in the past few days with the draft lottery, with the NBA Combine starting, with some interviews and quotes from Ime Udoka out there, specifically from theathletic.com and Kelly Iko, which has been a great article. Also, by the way, great resource. Go subscribe to The Athletic if you're not. But I wanted to weigh in on some of those and just give some thoughts on one, kind of how we got here. I wanted to look back and really just to give us context of what the Rockets may be looking to do in the future. I wanted to look back and see, okay, how did we get to this point from a roster construction standpoint? How did we get to this point from what does it mean that Udoka has been hired? What does his play style look like? And then what can that tell us about what the Rockets may want to do in this draft and free agency and moving forward, ultimately with the type of team that they want to build? So I'm going to start off, I'm going to basically break this down into two sections. In section one, just going to quickly summarize. Let's scan the roster. Let's see what from Houston's standpoint, what they think they may have on the roster. And then let's look ahead using some quotes from the Athletic article that from Udoka. Let's use some quotes and use maybe some context clues there to pick up what could the Rockets be thinking with the draft pick at number 4, with this draft overall, with free agency, and how they want to continue to build the roster and ultimately lift this franchise back into a competitive state, because it hasn't been there in the past few years. So part one, let's take a look at the roster construction as it stands right now in this offseason. So I think Rafael Stone and Houston have done a great job maintaining flexibility for this offseason, and I think it's going to extend a little bit into next offseason. But they maintain flexibility knowing that, hey, for a few years, we're going to bottom out, we're going to tank, we're going to get some high draft picks. Hopefully those draft picks are high impact players or develop into that. We'll have some cap space, knowing that the Rockets had some veteran players that they shipped off early on, obviously James Harden, but most recently someone like Eric Gordon. So they've kind of shifted off some salary, shifted off some of those veteran players. So they've reprioritized younger players. They've gotten back some cap space, and now they've maintained flexibility to again hopefully make an impactful move this offseason in the draft. Maybe some free agent additions, and then, again, I think in even next offseason to maintain a little flexibility there to see what else they need to shore up. So when we look at the Rockets and what they've done the past few years, we know back in 2020, this is really kind of where it starts. Houston traded a late second-round pick, I think it was top 55 protected, for Kevin Porter Jr., who is still currently a guard and has been the point guard for the Rockets these past few years. So he's still much in play as of right now. It seems like he's still very much in the picture. Udoka has spoken multiple times about Kevin Porter Jr. and how they may want to use him. So he is definitely a piece that I think we as Rockets fans need to consider as part of being, at least for now, going into this next year in the picture. So Kevin Porter Jr. comes in 2020. 2021, we know this is the draft where the Rockets have the second overall pick. They select Jalen Green to be the shooting guard, potentially of the future. We're still looking to see if that is the case with him. The Rockets also traded up to get Alperen Sengun at 16 in that draft, and Udoka has also spoken specifically about Sengun and what he could bring to the system that Udoka wants to run. So, he's in the picture at center. In that draft, there was also Usman Garuba and Josh Christopher. Remains to be seen if those guys fit into the future plans or not. As we move into 2022, we know Jabari Smith Jr. fell to the Rockets at 3, and he really started to turn it on last year at the power forward position. In that same 2022 draft, Tari Eason was selected with the 17th overall pick. He's at the very least been able to provide some quality depth and rotation minutes at small forward and a little bit at power forward too in some smaller lineups. And so that brings us here to 2023. The Rockets have the 4th pick. They also have the 20th pick. So when you look at this roster, I think from Udoka's standpoint, from Stone's standpoint, you look at it kind of in this context. The Rockets potentially have a guard and maybe a point guard in Kevin Porter Jr. Now, I think there's an argument to be made that he could benefit from a role change, maybe playing more off ball. That's even something that Udoka has spoken about, it being a strength of Porter Jr.'s is his off ball shooting. But I think, he also still can help facilitate the ball and be a facilitator on offense. So you have Kevin Porter Jr. I think they're going to look at Jalen Green. Can he really be that long-term answer at shooting guard? Can he be a cornerstone piece? I think Udoka is going to give him an opportunity to prove that he can be that guy. You look at Jabari Smith. I think he has the power forward position locked down. I think he really came on at the end of the season. And just with his potential and what he can do as a two-way player, I think he's going to thrive in Udoka's system. I'm really excited to see what Jabari Smith can do with Udoka. And then you look at Alperen Şengün, and I know there's been some mixed fan opinions on the type of center Şengün can be. Regardless, Udoka has spoken highly about him. So you kind of have four guys right now as these somewhat foundational pieces in Kevin Porter Jr., Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr., Alperen Şengün, and then I'm going to add in Tari Eason as at the very least a key impact rotation role player. And I think for the immediate going into next season, he'll probably come off the bench, and there's some benefit in having him come off the bench and coming into a game as a 3 or as a 4. I think that's going to be some nice flexibility that Udoka will like to lean on. Hey, I can put Tari Eason in here as a 4, or I can put him in here as a 3. I can run a big lineup, I can run a small lineup, and I know Tari Eason can come in and impact the game in a positive way. So I think those are, let's call it 5 key pieces that Houston and Udoka are excited about. So what that leaves Houston with, I think, is figuring out starting small forward, a starting wing, to pair with Jalen Green and potentially whoever the point guard will be. Will that be Kevin Porter Jr.? Will they move Kevin Porter Jr. to a wing spot and bring in another facilitator? Will Kevin Porter Jr. move to maybe a 6-man type of role? And now we're looking at a wing and a point guard. So I think wing, small forward is a focus for Houston. And then I think figuring out that point guard position is another focus. So that could be, either of these can be free agent signings. One of these could be crossed off with pick number 4 in the draft. Maybe Houston goes for someone like Amin Thompson, and this is not necessarily going to be a draft focused YouTube post here, but maybe they go with someone like Amin Thompson, who can kind of play a wing position but also be a facilitator. I think that remains to be seen, but I think at the very least Houston feels good about these 4 or 5 guys, and I think that's going to give them an idea of, okay, at pick number 4, if they do stay there, either based on the talent that's there when they're picking, what direction do we want to go? So I think that's a really just kind of, if we try to put ourselves in the shoes of Houston, of the Rockets, I think that's what they're going to be looking at. What I thought was really interesting, and so this, when I heard that Udoka was going to be hired by the Rockets, I was really ecstatic. In kind of an unrelated note, and this goes back to about, I want to say I started kind of paying attention to this, and I guess it must have been 2022 when Udoka was still with the Celtics. I started to try to ask myself, and this really kind of stemmed from looking at the Warriors and their dynasty and seeing them win their most recent championship. And look, like it or not, Rockets fans, that the Warriors have created a dynasty. Hopefully it's about to be sunset, right into the sun and be over. But I looked at their team and their team construction, and I thought it was super interesting because it was a little unconventional. You had, for the Warriors, you've always had a high amount of ball movement, which I think was super deadly. But then you had some unconventional players helping with that ball movement. You had a guy like Draymond Green come in and really be a key facilitator, and then go play somewhat of a undersized post position. And I always thought that was super interesting. You had a guy like Steph Curry, who was the point guard, often was leading the team in shot attempts, but was also capable of being either a lead facilitator or a secondary facilitator to someone like Draymond. they would have other players, whether it was Andre Iguodala or even someone like Kevon Looney, who could help move the ball. They've always had a different. They've always had multiple layers of facilitators, and I always thought that was super interesting. Just the way that roster was constructed, and I think that absolutely played into how dangerous that team could really be, and how hard it was to guard, or it has been to guard the Warriors. They just did a really good job of moving the ball. Some of this actually goes back to the way the Spurs used to play, and of course we know Steve Kerr had some time with the Spurs and with Pop, and then now from looking at the Warriors, I kind of saw some similarities with the Celtics and when Udoka was with the Celtics, with how their roster was constructed and the ball movement. It wasn't to the degree that the Warriors were using, but I saw someone like Marcus Smart as an interesting facilitator. But what I think a big impact that Udoka had on that roster that really helped elevate that roster was for motivating and impacting and influencing guys like Jason Tatum to be more of a facilitator, to ensuring that even Al Horford was helping move the ball. They brought in Derek White, who helped move the ball even this offseason. I know this isn't necessarily with Udoka, but Malcolm Brogdon was brought in as someone else that can help move the ball. So I know that ball movement was important for Udoka. And I started thinking about, okay, so if the Warriors are really a multifaceted facilitating team, the Celtics have kind of become that sort of roster to a lesser degree. Is that showing up anywhere else in the NBA? And I think there actually is an argument to be made that even a team like the Bucks back in I think it was 2021 when they won their title, you can go look at how their roster was constructed, and you could look at three pieces: Giannis, Chris Middleton, and Drew Holiday, and they really were kind of a core that helped move the ball. I want to say Dante DiVincenzo was on that team and helped move the ball for them as well. It may have been him or someone else. There was another guard there that would come off the bench sometimes, and now I'm curious. I'm gonna go see who it was. But I think there's been a case to be made that, you know, the old Rockets framework was, hey, James Harden is going to be the guy driving the offense and moving the ball and setting up players. For a while, Houston then moved to like a two-headed monster of James and Chris Paul, James and Russell Westbrook, and that got the Rockets only so far. And I think there's a case to be made that today's basketball really is more about multifaceted ball movement. And it can come from unconventional positions outside of just a point guard sort of position. So in thinking about all that, and I might do a separate YouTube post about just that, because I've run some different stats, and I've even kind of come up with some stats to follow this. But in thinking about that back in 2022, I started looking at the Rockets roster, and I started feeling that there was some semblance of this kind of happening with who the Rockets were getting. And I started to wonder, like, someone like Kevin Porter Jr., who's not necessarily a natural point guard, still a capable passer, could he, you know, flip out to a wing position and help be someone that can facilitate, but also hit those outside jumpers and, you know, and be an impact scorer to a degree. You started to see even Jalen Green this past season, his assists started to go up a little bit more. And so I looked at guys like Jaylen Brown, or I looked at guys like even almost like Jordan Poole, the way Jordan Poole can sometimes come in and help move the ball. I started to ask, you know, can Jalen Green elevate his passing to help the Rockets move the ball? You looked at Şengün. Obviously, Şengün flashed a lot of passing potential and a lot of passing talent when he got more opportunity with the Rockets. So I started to think, like, man, if the Rockets could figure out some sort of way to get another piece, whether it's a wing or more of a point guard piece that could really come in there and really help establish that passing, you almost could, you know, with a change in style of play, kind of unlock this offense for the Rockets. And this was before Udoka got hired. And then sure enough, Houston goes out and hires Ime Udoka, and I'm ecstatic because I'm like, man, this is like what Houston needs. I know they also need defense. I know they also need to increase their shooting. But if you go look at their passing stats and their ball movement stats have been some of the lowest in the league for the past couple of years. And it's just going to make games really, really tough when you're not moving the ball and sharing the ball, especially for this young of a team. So Udoka gets hired, and I'm ecstatic. So when looking at what Houston could do in this draft, specifically with pick number 4, I keep that in mind. I keep asking myself, like, of who's there, whether it's Scoot Henderson somehow drops to Houston or maybe they trade up for him, whether it's a guy like Brandon Miller who has flashed some semblance of playmaking a little bit and ball movement, or Amin Thompson, who is a guy that could definitely come in and move the ball for them. I've been trying to ask myself, like, is that player there for the Rockets at pick number 4 that could come in and help be someone that could facilitate and move the ball? And will that ultimately start answering some of these questions on, like, who's going to step up and be a starting wing? What are they going to do at the point guard position? And how does Houston really start to unlock this offense and really create some sort of identity of a basketball team? So I think that's been really interesting, just even in the past few days to think about. But then we got this great article from The Athletic, and there's some quotes that stood out to me that I wanted to touch on because I think they give us context of where the Rockets are going to go from here. Udoka started out by saying things like, of course, this is a young group. The conversations that he's been having have been different from some other teams with just how young this group of players is, but he thinks they're great guys. He was asked, like, how quickly do you think you can get these guys up to speed? And he said, you definitely have to be patient, especially with a younger group. But at the same time, you heard me in the press conference with this young thing, it's not an excuse. And I think what has stood out to me from a timeline standpoint is, the Rockets phase 1 was really bottoming out, was getting these high draft picks, was kind of like flushing out some of the veterans, getting a core group of young guys here. This draft will probably be the last draft where the Rockets have this high of a pick if all things start to work in phase 2. I think that was phase 1. Phase 2 to me has always been about, okay, let's start to elevate this roster and find out who are the potential cornerstone pieces, who are the potential star players, and then where are the holes or gaps that we need to go fill in to really elevate this team to be competitive. So I think that's where phase 2, especially in year 1 of being with Udoka, where that's going to come into play. So I bring that up to say, and this is kind of a little side caveat, I know the Rockets have free agency money, and Udoka even spoke to this a little bit in this article. I don't think they're going to go out and just throw all their free agency money at these big-time free agents and lock their money up for many, many years and lose their flexibility. I just don't think they're going to do that. I think, what they're going to do, and Udoka basically said this, is they're going to go out, look for free agents that can help elevate this young core. They still want to focus on this young core, help elevate them, help elevate their play, impact them from maybe not necessarily a coaching standpoint, but just like, helping these young guys to develop a little bit. But I think they're also going to try to maintain some level of flexibility moving forward that allows them to still focus on this young core and still maybe add a piece or two in free agency and even the next offseason after that. So Udoka has spoken to the timeline. He knows that, hey, it's not just going to happen overnight. This is going to have to take a little time. We're still trying to figure out, what do we even have here in Houston? Who are the legit players? And what do we need to add? But what I thought was really cool, Udoka spoke about the play style. He said this specifically. He said, the more versatile you can be offensively as a player in general, the more it helps you. I want guys that can initiate offense. A lot of times, guards and wings aren't used to setting screens and being the playmakers out of pocket passes. All of those things take some time. A lot of guys are used to having the ball in their hands. We also have guys that really shoot the ball well off screens, so we want to space them and have them well-rounded. We'll get a better idea of how to use the young guys, or how to use guys, but I do like the idea of everyone being able to make a play. I think that's huge. He goes on to say, put the ball on the floor, create for other guys. Do not just trying to score for yourself. He's speaking to the ball movement. And this is, again, going back to what I think has been lacking in Houston for a long time, what I think a lot of the successful teams in the NBA do is move the ball, and then you have multiple guys that can be facilitators on the floor, creating plays and opportunities for other guys on the floor. So I think that's exciting for Houston, and I think, again, that speaks to who they're looking to add at a wing position, at a point guard position, and the style of play they're looking to go to create and implement in Houston, which is going to be ball movement centric on offense. And so when you think about guys like Şengün or like KPJ or even Jalen Green, you start asking, yeah, we want them to be able to go, get a bucket on the offensive side of the court. We also want them to go make plays for everyone else and to help move that ball. So I think it's a really exciting quote from Udoka. Where that leads into free agency, like we were talking about, is he specifically said, I would say free agents, I want them to be more complimentary, honestly. I mean, you want to do both. You want to add veterans that aren't just a voice only. You want them to be out there, play and push the guys. But as I've said, regardless of free agency and the draft, we still have a group of guys we want to grow. We're looking for internal growth. So, again, that makes me think back to Jabari Smith, Jalen Green, Alperen Şengün, potentially Kevin Porter Jr., Tari Eason. Like, I think Udoka and Stone and Houston understand we have these core young guys, and our job is to figure out which one of these guys can be legit cornerstones, which one of these guys can really fit into the system that we want to run here and be players that we can build off of. Once we figure that out, that's going to tell us what else do we need to go add to make this team truly a team that's going to go compete in the playoffs and ultimately be a contender down the road. So I think that's what Houston's trying to do. And again, I don't think that means that like Houston's going to go out and just throw a ton of money at free agents just to try to get people to come in and play for them. Now, if someone like Jaylen Brown comes up that Udoka has experience with and obviously could fit into a system, different story. That might be on the timeline that the Houston Rockets are looking for with his age and where he's at in his career. But going after a guy like Pascal Siakam, going after a guy like Chris Middleton, if it's going to take a lot of money, even the James Harden talk probably isn't in the timeline of what Udoka wants. I just think that Houston and Udoka, what they're trying to do right now is identify the young guys who here is going to be part of the core, about a part of the foundation. Who can we add in the draft to possibly help that? And then what else do we need to go to fill in those gaps? What else do we need to go get to fill in those gaps? And how can we go get them? So I think for Rockets fans, I mean, the future is still very bright. I think there's great core pieces here in Houston. I think Houston got the right coach. I was really happy with the Udoka hire, and I think, obviously we haven't even seen him coach a game here in Houston. But from a basketball standpoint, I think he's going to bring a lot of positives to this roster and to this franchise. And then moving forward, I think the Rockets are still taking a strategic approach, not overextending themselves to, get too aggressive, still maintaining a emphasis on developing the core young guys, but also knowing, hey, we got to add some more talent here just to elevate the play overall to really kind of help things start to progress in the right direction. So, Rockets fans, Houston got pick number 4. It wasn't pick number 1. It wasn't pick number 2. It wasn't even pick number 3. Doesn't mean that the world, the sky's falling. Doesn't mean that the whole plan has gone out the window. I think Houston has done a good job getting themselves to this point. I think they've selected some good potential core pieces, whether it's Jabari Smith, whether it's Jalen Green, whether it's Alperen Şengün, Kevin Porter Jr., Tari Eason. And I think now you have an opportunity to go add to that at pick number 4 or use that draft pick to move up or down or find another asset. And then you also have maintained this flexibility in free agency to go get guys that make sense for the system that Houston wants to run and for the timeline that Houston is still in. And I think ultimately this is going to be a super interesting offseason, pretty pivotal one for Houston just to transition them from phase 1 to phase 2. And then I think looking from a more macro level, they'll probably still maintain some flexibility going into the next offseason. And I think they're going to really start to look at, of the guys that we have here, who do we want to keep, who can stay? Are there some guys that maybe just aren't going to fit in this new system that we have here in our timeline? Do we need to start looking at potentially trading and shopping them? We know there's some names that have already been out there as being shopped a little bit, but overall, I think Houston fans should feel good about where things are, and let's just continue to see how this plays out. So I might do another series on diving deeper into what I was looking at with the Warriors and their style of play and facilitating the Celtics, even, like I was talking about with the Bucks. There's some interesting trends, I think, that could be things just to keep tabs on as this Houston team starts to hopefully play better and get developed more. So I might go into that. I certainly want to do a post about the draft and what Houston could do at pick number 4. I know I've talked about the 3 scenarios already in a previous video earlier this week that I think Houston is in with pick number 4. At the moment, it's sounding like Houston's going to stay at pick number 4 and just pick who they think is the best talent there, which could be super interesting. And then I might speak to free agency a little bit as well. Again, my stance on free agency is, even though it's possible Houston could go throw a decent amount of money at a free agent, I don't think they're going to lock up all their free agent dollars just to spend it, and just to use it. I think they still want to maintain some level of flexibility going into next offseason, and they want to make sure they get the right guys in here who are going to help, as Udoka says, develop this core and also help be impactful players on the court, on the floor, and in the locker room. And so, half that just kind of depends on who's out there, who's available, of the free agents, who's willing to consider Houston, knowing that their timeline is what it is right now. But I think that's, something that we kind of have to keep in mind, is Houston isn't just overnight going to become a playoff team. They're still potentially a year or 2 away from even being a play-in team. So, hopefully it's like, they start really show signs of being a play-in team this next season. But, kind of is what it is, since you're still going to have to work through some growing pains, especially as Udoka goes and establishes his system with these guys here in Houston. So we'll see where this goes. I'm certainly going to be posting a few more posts, but hey, appreciate your time. If you like the posts and the videos, like and subscribe. Go find me on Twitter. My Twitter is @WestC512. I've been talking a lot about Rockets there, and it's been a lot of fun. So we'll see what happens. All right, y'all. Thanks.